Hi there, we're looking back at the 83 film based on that 83 World Cup triumph by the Indian team. But this is a different kind of a review where we're going to look at few things which they got wrong, few things which went into the realm of fiction rather than facts. I'm Nikhil Naz, with me is Rahul Rawat. But before we get to that, we both saw the film, we loved it. One reason that I love the film is that because we got to see a lot of these matches which we hadn't seen because of lack of footage. So at least we got to relive those moments, and now we have a reference point, some pictures to look back at it. One reason why you loved it.
Just because I wanted to see, possibly, we've seen these footage, videos on YouTube, on other platforms. I wanted to see how they've compiled or how they've managed to pull it off the entire. So and more or less, they've been very close. But yes, as you said, there were some facts and there was some fiction in that movie.
Let's start with fiction number one in the film. The film starts with two BCCI officials sitting in the office in Bombay and discussing over chai that, oh, World Cup, why should we send the team for World Cup? That reminded me of the film on hockey, on women's hockey called Chak De, where you could understand that sort of sentiment because the women's hockey team was obscure, nobody knew about them, and for the administrators to say that was understandable. But you can't say that about the Indian team in the 80s. Sunil Gavaskar, Kapil Dev were superstars. For those office workers to think of them as some two random people is also not true, because those two people were such big stars. And not only that, many other cricketers, they were on billboards, they were on newspapers, they were discussed everywhere. If they went out, they got mobbed. So to show them as some obscure women's hockey team, I think that was fiction number one.
Now, fiction number two, there's a scene in which it is mentioned that India's match against Zimbabwe, in which Kapil Dev scored 175, that was a do or die match. That was mentioned in that movie, but actually that was not a do or die match. In fact, the next match that India was scheduled to play against Australia, that was India's do or die match, because eventually India's points table, India was second with 4 victories from 6 games, and Australia finished with 3 victories, or rather 2 victories from their 6 games. So if India had lost the match against Australia, it would have meant that India and Australia would have finished at 3 points, 3 victories each, and eventually the net run rate would have come into play.
Fiction number three is that it's mentioned that there was no footage of that India versus Zimbabwe match because the BBC was on strike. Now, that wasn't quite true. The BBC actually didn't cover that match. Yes, there was some sort of industrial action by the BBC, but the BBC didn't cover that match because there were 4 games on that day. If you take a look at the BBC archives, they mention the live coverage for the next day, and the 2 games that they are covering, they covered the Australia-West Indies game and they covered the England versus Pakistan game. Those were the 2 more important games, and that's the games that they decided to cover. If you look back at BBC archives, you'll find footage of that match, which means that the BBC was working on that day. The other thing that tells you that there was no strike that day was that there was a match report of the journalists that were present there. They talk about an instance where India was struggling to begin with. A BBC correspondent had called the Zimbabwean manager at the ground and said that, listen, I think the match will be over really quick. Let's come and get your reaction. Then he said, no, don't come early. Anything can happen in the cricket. So if the BBC were on strike, that correspondent wouldn't have really called the Zimbabwean manager. So the BBC was not on strike. They decided not to cover this match because this was inconsequential.
Fiction number 4, team meeting just before the India-England semi-final. Kapil Dev is informed. In fact, a lot is being written about the Indian team, undermining them as underdogs against the English team. But Kapil Dev recalls and tells his teammates how in 1976, Tony Greig once said that he'll make the West Indians growl. So Kapil Dev also, in fact, said what West Indies achieved after that statement. But the fact is that in 1975, West Indies had already won a World Cup, and factually it would be incorrect to say that after that statement from Tony Greig, West Indies won 2 World Cups. So that was a mention that was made in this particular movie.
Fiction number 5, and this also involves the West Indies team. The first time that they are introduced in the film, there is a scene that they're practicing in the nets, and the Indian players are watching them practice in the nets, and each player is introduced. Look at that, that is Malcolm Marshall. He's so fast. Look at Vivian Richards, he's the best batsman in the world. So it seemed like, that scene seemed like as if Indian players, a lot of Indian players were seeing the West Indies players for the first time. Well, that is not true. Just 3 months before that, India had taught the West Indies, played that similar players. In fact, there were many players in the Indian team at that time who had played the West Indies team on multiple occasions to show that this was the first time the Indian players were encountering the West Indian team, or first time they saw in real life someone like a Malcolm Marshall, Michael Holding, Vivian Richards. That's also not true. That's quite exaggerated, but I think sometimes it tends to happen when you're making a film.
Fiction number 6. Now, this is interesting. Kapil Dev and Madan Lal's wife, they're sitting together in the stands. This is the final that we're talking about. India was shot out for 183 in the final. And West Indies are off to a decent start. If not a good start, they're off to a decent start. And it seemed that India might just end up losing this match. Kapil Dev's wife and Madan Lal's wife, they leave the ground together. In this particular movie, what they've shown is that first, Deepika Padukone, who's playing the character of Kapil Dev's wife, leaves first after she's being harassed, if I may say so, by the crowd, by the West Indian supporters. And thereafter, Madan Lal's wife also leaves the ground. Well, it did happen, but they left together. They had thrown their tickets away, and once when they reached their hotel rooms and they saw that Indians are doing pretty well, in fact, they're getting those wickets. Vivian Richards got out during that time, and they decided that we need to return to the stadium to be there to enjoy and celebrate with the team. But unfortunately, they were not allowed to enter. So that was all.
They didn't cry either.
Exactly, they didn't cry, and of course, Madan Lal's wife never said that. उसने मदन को 3 चौके एक ही ओवर में मार दी और then she's
I think that was dramatizing.
Yes, that's creative liberty, I might if I can say that. And also they didn't cry that much, after whenever a wicket would fall. Of course, I don't think they would have cried so much, because these are stories that we've heard first hand from the very players who were there part of that World Cup. So that much creative liberty they've taken, but that is another fiction.
Of course, if you want to read more interesting stories, more interesting facts about this story that is a 1983 World Cup, they can do somewhere else.
Yes. You've written a book.
Yeah, so I thought you will say that. It'll look very bad if I say that.
No,
you can pick up my book. It's called Miracle Men. It's on the 1983 World Cup. It has far more in-depth research of the 1983 World Cup triumph, much more than a film can offer, but that's also because different platforms.
In fact, this is the reason why we thought that we'll do this video, because when we saw that movie together a few days back, Nikhil was pinpointing a few of those if I can say factual errors, or maybe they've just to dramatize the situation, or the entire incident. That's the creative liberty that often the directors take, but not taking anything away from the actors who've played those roles, not taking anything away from Kabir Khan, who's directed this fantastic movie.
It was a humongous task, I can imagine, to recreate all of that for the entire team. Big thumbs up, congratulations for doing it, and for giving such memories to a lot of people who were not even born during that time. So we've seen 2 to 3 generations who may not have seen, a lot of this footage, only have heard through their parents and, uncles, aunts. So for them, at least, there is some reference point. But if there are other factual errors that you saw, do post in your comments. We'll love to read that, and maybe we'll make another video then if we get plenty of more facts versus fiction.